Yes, guys, we are in the heart of 2025 fantasy football draft season, and I am coming at you with my top 50 wide receivers, beginning with number 50. I do have Marquise Brown on the Chiefs. Ended the season very, very strong. With a healthy QB, guys, every time we've seen Marquise Brown fully healthy, with a fully healthy QB, he's put up top 20 wide receiver numbers. That goes all the way back to his time on the Ravens, then the Cardinals, okay? Only played 2 games last year during the regular season, 7.5 targets per game on only 34% of snaps. So Marquise Brown, especially with Rashee Rice suspended, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, okay? Marquise Brown is a nice sleeper to target in drafts. At wide receiver 50, that's a pretty good value on my board, and he's going beyond that in drafts, okay? 49, we have Christian Kirk. 48, Brandon Ayuk. 47, Jaden Reed. 46, Rome Odunze. And for the most part, this is going to be a pretty rapid-fire ranking segment here, guys. Just because there's 50 guys we could talk about, I could be here all day, all right? And I'd like to look at a draft board at the end of the episode and show you some values that I'm targeting in my drafts. And as always, guys, these rankings, every position, every scoring type is available in the No Expert FF Discord. Link in the description or the bio. All right. At number 45, I have Emeka Egbuka coming in that wide receiver 4 range, wide receiver 45, okay? He is one of 2 Ohio State wide receivers with 2 1,000-plus yard seasons to their name, okay? The other is Marvin Harrison Jr., who, if we rewind 1 year, was one of the greatest wide receiver prospects of all time and still has some unfinished business in the NFL, obviously. We'll talk about him a bit more later. But yes, it's Egbuka and Harrison Jr. Only 2 OSU wide receivers with 2 1,000-plus yard season. He holds the career record for Ohio State. Egbuka does in receiving yards, just over 2,800, and receptions, just over 200, okay? We saw last year that Baker can support 2+ top 24 wide receivers. I view Egbuka as the future of the Bucs offense. Godwin is already missing a little bit of time. He's not healthy yet, okay? Evans is aging, okay? And Egbuka is simply better at football than Jalen McMillan. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that Egbuka begins the season as the wide receiver 2 on the team. And even if he doesn't, he should be there by the end of the year, in my opinion, okay? Wide receiver 44, I have Ricky Pearsall. Wide receiver 43, Jordan Addison. Wide receiver 42, Stephon Diggs. And the best wide receiver here in tier 6 for me is Calvin Ridley. Last year with no quarterback, Calvin Ridley, weeks 8 to 17. 1,145 air yards. That was the most among all NFL wide receivers. 760 receiving yards. That was top 8 among receivers. And he was a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. Okay, wide receiver 17 for the back half of last season. Now this year, I still think he's the clear Tennessee wide receiver 1. Cam Ward from Will Levis is an upgrade. And the draft cost for Ridley is outside the top 50 wide receivers, which is a complete value because he has a safe floor and a good ceiling. All right. Getting into tier 5. Okay. At 40, I have Deebo Samuel. I think he's a nice pick, despite the memes online. 39, Chris Olave. I don't think he's a nice pick, but at that price, I'll probably take him. 38, Jerry Jeudy. Finally getting some respect here in drafts. Who knows who the QB will be? Does it really matter? I don't know. Wide receiver 37. So this is the best wide receiver 4, just outside of that flex range. I do have Travis Hunter. And then wide receiver 36, going into that wide receiver 3 range here, is Josh Downs, guys. So last season with a healthy quarterback, Josh Downs, weeks 4 through 11, and this is the only time he was completely healthy and his quarterback was, 15.8 fantasy points per game, 8+ targets. So that's good for top 15, maybe even a top 12 wide receiver. And this season, Daniel Jones is likely going to start as the QB in Indianapolis. And if you remember, I'm old enough to remember personally in 2024 when Wan'Dale Robinson, yes, Wan'Dale Robinson, ranked top 10 in total wide receiver targets because Daniel Jones was peppering him, guys. All right, in 2024, there was a big chunk of the season where Wan'Dale was honestly almost leading the position in targets. Pretty ridiculous. So same type of targets that Wan'Dale gets, whatever, are going to go to Downs from Daniels, in my opinion. All right. Wide receiver 35, we do have Khalil Shakir, Juwan Jennings, wide receiver 34, Jalen Waddle, 33. I think that's a nice value. Wide receiver 32, we have Xavier Worthy, who finished the season very strong. Big playability, nice target floor, actually, which is kind of surprising. Speaking of targets, 31, Cooper Kupp, 30, Devontae Smith, and 29, Teteroa McMillan. So with Tet, guys, he's approaching that wide receiver 2 category for me. He is the most talented, most well-rounded, most best, if you will, wide receiver on the Panthers by far. And Bryce Young was a top 10 QB in fantasy land to finish last year's season. So we saw weeks here and there from different receivers. Maybe it was Coker, maybe it was Leggett, okay, maybe it was Thielen for a little bit, maybe it was Deontay Johnson weirdly, right, last year. But Bryce Young can support some fantasy goodness at the wide receiver position. And if Tet is truly the guy, truly the wide receiver 1, which I believe he will be, given he's a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, you don't draft a guy there, right, to throw the ball to Jalen Coker all game, okay? I think he's going to be a nice flex to start the season and honestly has top 12 wide receiver potential. Let's get into tier 4 here, and we're talking high-end wide receiver 3s, low-end wide receiver 2s, beginning at wide receiver 28 with Chris Godwin. I have Rashee Rice at wide receiver 27 after the news came out that he's most likely going to be suspended 4 to 6 games. I do have him outside the wide receiver 2 range, but like I said, wide receiver 27 over guys like Godwin, who's currently injured. I'm still taking Rice over McMillan. Maybe that's crazy. I'm taking him over Devontae Smith, taking him over Cooper Kupp, Xavier Worthy, because when Rashee Rice is on the field, he's going to be producing like a top 15 wide receiver. And if I have to wait 6 weeks for that, and I can get him in the 5th, 6th round now, maybe 7th, right? I'm probably doing it, okay? Zay Flowers at wide receiver 26. He's simply a product of just the Ravens offense. I actually don't love Flowers for fantasy, but he's just in such an offense that scores this wild amount of points, wins games all the time. Okay, so I'm not in on Flowers really. He's outside my wide receiver 2 range, but he's not a bad pick for a flex. Okay, high-end flex at wide receiver 26. Jacoby Myers here at wide receiver 25. Speaking of a high-end flex, a guy who's actually more of a solid wide receiver 2, it is Myers, okay? So last season, every single wide receiver with 15-plus games played and 9-plus targets per game finished a top 15 football or fantasy football wide receiver. Or should I say every single one except Jacoby Myers. And the reason is because we had AOC throwing him the ball. It was a clear QB issue, okay? Now we get Geno Smith, who just fed JSN targets, 8-plus targets per game last year in 2024. Those two actually catch a lot of similar type of passes, Myers and JSN, so I think it's kind of like a match made in heaven, and Jacoby Myers is on the border of that wide receiver 2 range for me. Now we crack the top 24 wide receivers, our wide receiver 2s, to begin with Jameson Williams at 24, Terry McLaurin at 23, Devontae Adams at 22, and George Pickens at 21, an early wide receiver my guy contender, because the Cowboys have ranked top 10 in total wide receiver fantasy points in 5 of the last 6 seasons, guys. And Pickens has escaped Arthur Smith. He's entering the prime of his career if we're looking at the age graphs. And this is absolutely the best offensive of his career and the best quarterback he's had. So all we've been saying about Pickens is he needs a QB, right? And sure, maybe he's got some issues going on upstairs, okay? But honestly, maybe he's just frustrated. Maybe he's just frustrated with the quarterbacks like Kenny Pickett throwing him the ball. You know what I mean? So let's see. I think the ceiling here for George Pickens is like a Higgins and Chase type of duo with Pickens and Lamb. So we shall see. I'm in on George Pickens, a very good wide receiver 2 pick for me. At 20, wide receiver 20, Mike Evans. And at wide receiver 19, to round out tier 4 of this low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3s, I do have Marvin Harrison, guys. All right. So now we will begin with a big tier here. This is a big tier. It is tier 3. And this takes us from wide receiver 18 all the way to wide receiver 7. So we're talking high-end high-end wide receiver 2s to low-end wide receiver 1s. All right? And we will begin with DJ Moore, another contender, just an early contender at wide receiver 18 for a my guy. Because seeing what Ben Johnson does to these offenses, and I understand Ben Johnson is the head coach, not the offensive coordinator in Chicago. I understand that. Okay, but we've seen like a Sean McVay, Mike McDaniels. We've seen head coaches just have massive impacts on the offense around the league in years past, and I think Ben Johnson does the same thing. DJ Moore has a very good QB in Caleb Williams. I know we haven't quite seen it yet, but I'm a big believer in Caleb Williams. And to put it into perspective, how good does Caleb Williams have to be? I would say that Caleb Williams has more raw football talent, is a better quarterback skill-wise than Jared Goff. I would say that, and I don't think that's super controversial. Some people might not like that, but I think the ceiling for Williams is higher than the ceiling for Goff, okay? So If Goff is finishing top 6, top 8 QB for 3 years in a row, whatever it is with Johnson, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams finishing top 20 wide receivers last season to close the season out, okay? And ARSB was in the running for wide receiver 1 overall. Why can't DJ Moore finish this year, have the best year of his career, be a top 4, top 5 wide receiver? I think he absolutely can. At wide receiver 17 is A.J. Brown. Last 10 games played, guys, okay? He's only been a top 10 wide receiver in 3 of the last 10 games played, and you're not going to like the rate that he's falling outside the top 36 wide receivers. I'm lower on A.J. Brown, okay, because they have Saquon, they have Hurts, they have Devontae Smith, and they have A.J. Brown. So any given week, he could be the 4th best scoring option. Any given week, he could be the 1st, sure, in a great offense, but it's just the variability you get with A.J. Brown from week to week that doesn't have me locking him in as a top 12 wide receiver, because for a top 12 wide receiver, I need the A.J. Brown ceiling, but I also need, all right, the Nico Collins floor, the Ladd McConkey floor, something like that. And I need the floor, and he does not have the floor. He does not have the floor. So this is unpopular. I have him at wide receiver 17. I know you guys don't like it. I mean, last year finished as wide receiver 19, right? Because now we start adding the health concerns too. We can always something wrong with A.J. Brown. I'm good. All right, wide receiver 16 is DK Metcalf. We will discuss him real quick because his new quarterback is Aaron Rodgers. And we have a history with Aaron Rodgers where all he does is pepper his wide receiver 1 with targets. Doesn't matter who it is. So last year, for example, the most recent example of this is Devontae Adams when he joins the Jets. His first full game was in week 9. From that point to the end of the season, 20.1 fantasy points per game, top 5 at the position, and 11 plus targets per game. For reference, guys, most targets per game last year was Malik Neighbors with 11, okay? Devontae just comes in and paces that mark because of Aaron Rodgers. So that was with Garrett Wilson on the team, by the way. Now, if you take Rodgers and his wide receiver 1 to this year, we have Rodgers and Metcalf, and there's no Garrett Wilson. I understand Arthur Smith might be a bit of a problem, but I think Rodgers is going to get the say here if he wants to be throwing the ball more, especially to DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf's the only guy catching passes on this team. There's Calvin Austin. There's Roman Wilson. Maybe they have a role, but there's no way those guys are coming out and averaging 7 plus targets per game, okay? I think he's going to be absolutely fed targets, DK Metcalf. I would be surprised if it's lower than 8 plus targets per game, and that's an underestimate. Magic number for wide receiver 1 production for fantasy is 9 plus targets per game for about 15 games, as we talked about with Myers. I think DK can do it and finish top 12 based on volume, and then he's a big play threat on top of it, okay? T. Higgins at wide receiver 15. For a very large point of last season, T. Higgins was wide receiver 2, behind only his teammate. So I think T actually has wide receiver 1 overall finish in his range of outcomes. Obviously, if Jamar goes down, we hope he doesn't, but even if just a couple more touchdowns swing T. Higgins' way over the course of a whole season for both of them, he could actually outscore Jamar, I really think, in an MVP Burrow season, which I think is about to happen. Cortland Sutton comes in at 14, another contender for a my guy. Let's just talk about him. So Knicks took like 6 games, if you will, to adjust to the NFL. And that's not a lot, by the way, but it was pretty clear his first month and a half for Bo Nix was not great. Not where it was to finish the season, I should say. And Cortland Sutton, even including those games, averaged 8 plus targets per game. Now, if you take those games out, okay, he had 9 plus targets in the remaining 10 games, 18 fantasy points per game. He was a top 8 wide receiver. So this guy already finished as a wide receiver 1 for fantasy football lands, okay, to close the season. Yet he's going around like wide receiver 20, 5th round. This is insane. This Cortland Sutton might be the most undervalued wide receiver in drafts. 0 target competition. I don't want to hear about Pat Bryant. I don't want to hear about Marvin Mims. Sure, they're good late round dart throws, but for the most part, it's the Cortland Sutton show. Again, 9 plus targets for 15 games, and he'll be top 12. Garrett Wilson comes in at 13. Just another guy who's just going to see the volume. Like, I wish it wasn't Justin Fields, but realistically, Garrett Wilson could push for 200 targets on the season, total targets. And I know that's a lot, okay? That's like 12 targets per game. Insane, right? But it's possible. And I think that he actually could hit his true ceiling with Justin Fields because they have nobody else. All Justin Fields does, all right, is he has trouble processing. Justin Fields does not work well when he has to go from first read, second read, third read, okay, maybe a check down, whatever. It's first read to Wilson or it's a check down to Breece Hall, or it's a tuck the ball and run and be Justin Fields. So, and more times than not, that first read to Wilson is going to be open. Now we're going to crack into the top 12 here, our wide receiver ones, and coming in at 12, and you could see him get lowered for me. Another guy similar to A.J. Brown, where I'm just not as in as the community, is Drake London. So Drake London finished a top 12 receiver in only 3 games of the entirety of last season. Only 3 games. I'm going to pull up Sleeper here, and we're going to look at his game log. Okay? His wide receiver 5 finish was completely boosted by the fact that he played 17 games. And I'm going to give credit where it was due. He was very good. I mean, let me just read you his game log here from weeks 2 through 7, okay? 17 points, 18 points, 12, 33, 19, 18. Like, that's pretty awesome. Okay? In fact, one of those games, week 5, 33 points, was one of his top 12 finishes. Then we look at the games with Penix, which was week 16 through 18, I believe. And this is what everyone is all excited about, is that with Michael Penix in these games, one of which, by the way, week 18 against Carolina, like, why are we putting so much weight on that? But I'll do it. Let's just do it, okay? We're looking at the targets. So with Penix, 8 targets week 16, 13 week 17, and then 18 targets in week 18. That's awesome. If we look at the fantasy points, though, in week 16, 11, then he had 17.6. That's good. That's very good. But is this good? Is this like what we want out of a high second rounder? And then, of course, we're all latching onto this 41-point game in week 18, which is awesome. It's really great to see that that's possible. I just don't know if a 3-game sample size, where 2 of the games were good, and one of them was amazing, but it was against Carolina in week 18 for a rookie QB's first 3 games I just don't know. Like, I don't understand why JSN, Ladd McConkey, guys like that are not going ahead of London, to be honest. And that's just where I am on London. Hopefully he makes me eat my words, because I've liked him for many years. He just has a little more question marks. Like, I do have him in that Garrett Wilson tier, that T. Higgins tier, DK Metcalf tier, A.J. Brown tier, right? All these guys are in tier 3. So we'll see. Now, I just mentioned it, but Ladd McConkey comes in at wide receiver 11. If we just look at the targets, like, we're talking about a floor, this is floor. This floor is insane. So I'll just read the targets here. Guys, multiple games with 9+ targets to close the season. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of his final 6 games, 9+ targets, and just putting up numbers, Ladd McConkey. So his fantasy points scored week 11 on 18.3, 14.3, 21, 17, 15, 30, 17. See, that's great. Those numbers are similar to Drake London's, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games in a row. A couple games before that, he had a 30-pointer in week 8 for no reason, right? So I'm more in on McConkey just based on the target floor. I prefer Justin Herbert to Michael Penix. And again, if you guys are listening and you don't necessarily agree, that's totally fine, because they're in the same tier, okay? Wide receiver 7 here to wide receiver 18 are all in the same tier. I really think you can order these guys any way you want. Number 10 is JSN. Number 9, we have Brian Thomas Jr., who averaged 28.2 fantasy points per game last year during the fantasy playoffs with Mac Jones at QB. So when Trevor Lawrence comes back, yes, I expect that to get better. Tyreek Hill at wide receiver 8. I said Cortland Sutton is the most disrespected wide receiver. It actually might be Tyreek Hill. He's played for the Dolphins 3 seasons. The first 2, he finished the top 2 wide receiver for fantasy. And last year, he was wide receiver 18. But he had a torn wrist ligament for all 17 games, and Tua missed 6 of those games. And he was still wide receiver 18. And the video circulating of this man on the internet, all right? And I will specify videos of him playing football. God, your mind out of the gutter, okay? Those videos are looking pretty good of him. And I don't think he's washed. I'm in on Tyreek. You try to go play 17 games with a torn wrist ligament, all right? You probably won't like it. Okay, Nico Collins comes in at number 7 for me. And let's take a look at his 17-game pace last year, because it is something to look at. I view Nico Collins as a wide receiver in drafts with 0 question marks. In fact, I think right now you're going to see a live adjustment of the rankings, all right? And we're going to see Nico move into tier 2. Oh, shit, I messed it up. Okay, wait, hold on. For those of you watching, I'm sorry. Okay, Nico's moving into tier 2, so we'll begin tier 2 with Nico. And this is taking us from wide receiver 7 with Collins all the way to wide receiver 3. So I do have Collins in tier 2 as just a wide receiver with no question marks. 80% plus snaps in 6 games last year. We'll call these his healthy games, okay? 20.3 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 4. 9.8 targets per game, wide receiver 6. With the Texans, they have a top 5 wide receiver strength of schedule. They have a new offensive coordinator who's going to chuck the ball, less Joe Mixon, more CJ Stroud. And CJ Stroud's average depth of target is actually pretty high year to year. So Nico Collins is a true fantasy alpha wide receiver and honestly a league winner at this point. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown comes in at 6. I do view Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, okay, Nico Collins, this group here, I do really view them ahead of the guys we talked about before, Hill, BTJ, JSN, McConkey. Like, if you can get your hands on one of these guys in drafts, please do so. So, like I said, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 6, not much to talk about there. Malik Neighbors coming in at 5. Now, Malik is slightly injured right now. I hope that gets resolved, okay, because a lot of people don't realize just how good he was last year. Because it's hard to get all hot and bothered about Malik Neighbors with the QB situation and how bad the Giants are and things like that. But as a rookie, guys, like we just assume he's been here for 3-4 years. It's how it feels with Malik Neighbors. His ranks among wide receivers, top 7 in receiving yards, top 3 in receptions, air yards, he ranked 6th, and 1st among every single wide receiver in targets, 11 targets per game, guys. That's insane. To come into the league and just lead the league, lead all wide receivers in targets per game with no QB, and finish wide receiver 6 overall for fantasy. I mean, his floor is a top 10 wide receiver. It's true if he's fully healthy. So he was the number 1 wide receiver in expected points per game. It's very predictable for future success. This is a rare floor here, a rare high floor, and his ceiling, honestly, is the best player in 2026. At wide receiver 4, I have Puka Nacua. And I'll just read you my notes on Puka, okay? And these are the notes that I provide to my subscribers. I update them every single day. So like I said, join the Discord in the link below. Get my top 300 rankings, every single position, draft strategies, ask me any single question you want. The list goes on. But I'll read some of my notes on Puka. And I quote, "I'm confused why Puka isn't in a unanimous top 4 wide receiver across all rankings. But that just means more for us. 2024 weeks 8 through 17 after injury. 8+ targets in 9 of those 10 games. 19.8 fantasy points. That was top 2. Only Jamar Chase was better than Puka last year when he was healthy. His rookie season, the only other time he's played, Puka finished wide receiver 4 overall, yet he's being drafted at the end of the first round. Adams coming to the Rams is interchangeable with Kupp, in my opinion. Very different real-life receivers, but for fantasy purposes, both are target hogs. That's really the only thing that matters. Adams will see probably 8+ targets per game when healthy. I couldn't care less. Less coverage on Puka, who will average 10+ targets per game and be a PPR animal yet again. So he is my wide receiver 4. And I might have to adjust these tiers a little bit because, like, there's 0 worlds where I'm drafting Neighbors, St. Brown, or Collins over Puka. So potentially tier 2 is limited to Puka at 4. And yes, Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 3. We take his greatness for granted, guys. Last 3 seasons, wide receiver 2 overall, wide receiver 1 overall, wide receiver 4. It just kind of reminds me of Jamar Chase last year. He was one of the best picks in fantasy last year, Jamar Chase, in drafts. But since he disappointed the year before, I don't know, he wasn't like the unanimous number 1, right? There should be 0 hesitation with JJ. And yes, guys, we will move into tier 1 now. All right, let's do it. Wide receiver 2 is CeeDee Lamb. And it's funny because the wide receiver 1, obviously, at this point, you guys have figured it out. The only guy we haven't talked about yet is Jamar Chase. So I have Chase at 1 and Lamb at 2. But I kind of view them interchangeably, all right? Now, the reason I like CeeDee Lamb so much is, if it wasn't obvious, but I think he has the best floor of any fantasy football wide receiver. His last 20 games with Dak Prescott, top 24 or better in 85% of them. So wide receiver 2 or better in 85% of them. 85%. And a top 12 wide receiver in 55%. So for context, Jamar last year, this amazing season Jamar had, he was a wide receiver 2 or better in 77% of games. Like I said, Lamb was 85, so a higher wide receiver 2 floor. And he was a top 12 wide receiver in 59% of them. Lamb, last 20 games with Prescott, 55%. So they're closer. Jamar kind of hits the ceiling more, but his floor is lower, where CeeDee Lamb hits the floor more, but his ceiling is a little bit lower, is the main takeaway. I view Lamb as the highest floor of any receiver here in drafts. But, I mean, if we're talking a wide receiver 1 overall and we're trying to win the leagues, we are going for ceiling, and that's the reason Jamar Chase is the guy here at wide receiver 1, okay? He's the only wide receiver, guys, last year to score 23+ fantasy points per game, 400 total fantasy points, 1,700 total receiving yards, 750+ yards after the catch, and 17 touchdowns. Truly, 2024 was an otherworldly season for this guy. The wide receiver 1 overall has changed right? The finisher, who's the best wide receiver, has changed. Like past 6-7 years, it's been a different guy every time. Could Jamar do it again? Absolutely. History suggests no. I'm actually not betting against him, though, so we shall see. Now, what I want to do now is head over to ADP and show you guys some values in drafts. So I'm just going to Control F, wide receiver. Now, we're looking at Fast Draft here. Fast Draft is by far, ladies and gentlemen, the best place to draft teams. It's 10-team drafts. The drafts are quick, fast draft, right? Fast. It's total point scoring, best ball, so there's no like matchup configuring. You don't have to be like in the depths, the bowels of the schedule, trying to like you just literally just pick the best players. It's so much fun. And use code NOEXPERT, link down below, but use code NOEXPERT when you sign up, guys, up to $50 free in deposit match. So that's like 2.5, 3 drafts free, which is great. Okay. Looking at the wide receivers, we'll talk about some values. So Jamar is the 101, the number 1 wide receiver, not a value there. JJ is wide receiver 2, so we'll start right away with CD at wide receiver 3, 5th overall as a value. I have CD as a top 4 player, and my wide receiver 2. Coming in at wide receiver 4 on this board is Malik Neighbors, and again, it kind of speaks more to Puka at wide receiver 5, 9th overall. I'm taking Puka over Neighbors. So far on the fast draft board, we have CD and Puka as some values. Let's keep looking. Nico Collins, 11th overall, ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown at 12th overall. I actually prefer Amon-Ra, so we will talk about that value. Brian Thomas, 13, Drake London, 14. You guys know how I feel about Drake London. We haven't talked much about Brian Thomas Jr., but I think 13th overall is pretty appropriately priced there. All right. 18th overall, Ladd McConkey. I think it's a little high. I wish it was in the 20s. A.J. Brown at 19. That's more of where I'd like to see him go. In drafts, T. Higgins at 22. A little overpriced, but if it hits, it hits. Rashee Rice, 26. After the suspension, no thank you. Garrett Wilson, 27, is an absolutely monster pick. JSN, 30th overall, so that's the beginning of round 4 and 10 team value. Marvin Harrison Jr., 31. I don't know. Devontae Adams, 33rd overall. A little high. McLaurin, 34. I don't know if I'm looking there. And then there's our guy, Tyreek Hill, in the 4th round, 37th overall, an absolute value on Fast Draft. Again, guys, code NOEXPERT. You get a bunch of free drafts, compete for real money. It's literally so easy to win. Not a lot of people on the app. So, a good use of your time and your money. And when you watch my videos and you find these values, they really pay off. That's going to do it for today, guys. Good luck in the drafts. Adios.